Got on my leather jacket Thriller. The show ain't nothing iller. Man, I'm a lady killer. If I want her, I'ma steal her. I promise I can make her fly away like caterpillars. So if you don't know by now, then you should probably get familiar.
Hi, everyone. Well, you can't see me now because, George, we seem to have an overlay on our face. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Comedy with the Vaughn Agency. Hi, Annette.
Hi, Letitia.
Well, thank you for joining us all the way from Florida. To our viewers, sorry we're a couple of minutes late today. As is the case in an environment where everything's online, live streaming gets to be a little bit glitchy, but here we are, and my beautiful friend Annette and my very handsome partner George, and hopefully we'll all be connected the whole hour. So let's start by introducing our fantastic guest Annette, who is joining us from Florida today. How's the weather in Florida, Annette? Oh, so we're on
it's a beautiful day.
It's a beautiful day. Okay. So we're going to have a little bit of a delay, everybody, but let me tell you just a little bit about Annette. Annette Guarino was the referee for New York City Family Court in the Bronx. She was also a family court judge in Westchester. So if any of our Westchester people are tuning in, this is where we spent time together. She served as Deputy General Counsel for the Battery Park City Authority, and that was during and after 9/11 attacks on the World Trade Center, which was just across the street from the Battery Park City Authority. She's also district tax attorney for Hudson Valley for the New York State Department of Taxation and Finance, and she was in private solo practice in Rye, New York. She is one of my smartest friends. She's got lots of letters after her name, similar to others who've been on the calls with us. She graduated at St. John's University School of Law with a JD. She's a senior member of the St. John's Law Review, admitted to practice in New York State in 1982. She Bernard and Baruch College, and previously she was the co-founder of the Catholic Lawyers Guild, Bronx County, Westchester Women's Bar Association. She was the state director, vice president, and treasurer chair of various committees, and she served on the Rye City Zoning Board of Appeals. She was a Rye GOP chairman, New York State GOP state committee woman, Rye Rotary, and president-elect and Paul Harris Fellow of the Columbia Lawyers Association. So that's Annette Guarino in a nutshell, and we welcome you here today to talk a little bit about the difference between New York and Florida. And Annette, I just want to tee you up, and then I'm going to let you get going, and I'm going to quiet down. The reason we wanted to talk to you today is because you had been so very active in New York State government, and you served in many capacities, including in taxation and in law and in an authority. And I wanted you to kind of give viewers a perspective on what you know to be true about New York and the difference between New York and Florida when it comes to handling, I guess, emergencies, right? Because you were in the emergency in 9/11, albeit it wasn't a pandemic, but it was an emergency. And now you've been through COVID in Florida. So if you wouldn't mind, give our viewers a little perspective about, the difference, why you moved to Florida and the difference between the two states.
Okay. We certainly, you and I, Letitia, experienced 9/11 together. And that was a primer of crisis management and emergency management. It's same idea, something that you had no reason to expect, no way of knowing it was coming, and very little time to prepare, if at all. And the approaches that were used way back then in 9/11 and that have been used in this pandemic are really quite different. In many ways, they are comparative. In 2011, the federal government was very generous to New York State and other states that were impacted and rendered any assistance that could be given to the state in order to help us rebuild or recover or deal with the crisis. Florida, by the same token, received whatever it asked for, but seemed to have been much better prepared. I come to understand and to think that that has a lot to do with the people in charge and with the way that the budgets in both of those states differ before the pandemic became extant, that we knew it was happening and that it would need a very strong response. In New York, as you know, the budget was underwater. There have been serious issues about funding and money going back years. Every year it's a struggle to close the budget. In Florida, it's the opposite. There are billions of dollars in reserve. The budget's in good shape. The state prepares by keeping its warehouse full of what it needs to get through a hurricane. A lot of those are translatable for our purposes for a pandemic, and they were. And then the differences in approach were just amazing. Obviously, New York took the brunt. It was an epicenter. It was a place where more than anywhere else, there's 50% of all transportation in the United States is in New York. I think we all know that, which meant the density and the impossibility of people not interacting with each other. Florida doesn't have that kind of density. What it does have, though, is the second largest elderly population in the whole country. The difference here, I think, is that Governor DeSantis, took the way he described it at his press conference back just about a month ago with the president at the White House. He described it as taking a tailored and measured response. One of my favorite things, that one size doesn't fit all. He recognized that he had a particular vulnerable population, and he put all of the effort and all the targeting into that population in the 4 counties where it mattered: Miami-Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach County. So all of those counties were essentially targeted. All of the nursing homes were targeted. All of the PPE was sent there. He took several important measures very quickly, even at the time that the states were just starting to close down. He closed down the centers to the nursing facilities to any visitors. He was very careful to make sure that everyone in those facilities was tested. He didn't allow people to move between facilities as they were working. When people went to the hospital, they were not returned to the facilities. So the preparation and the immediate actions that were taken changed the narrative. The models were terrible for Florida. The model said that we were going to be as badly hurt as New York, California, Michigan, Ohio, Illinois, all the major states, New Jersey, and Connecticut. And it's only been the last 2 weeks that the media has realized that that was not the case and has started to backtrack and issue articles that really show why his tailored and measured response worked.
Well, I want to really dive into that a little bit, because I think that you started by saying that, handling an emergency, or what makes something an emergency, is that you don't expect it, right? But being able to handle it well is being prepared, or being able to pivot. And some people who joined us, who you served in an emergency with, our good friend Denora Paz is on with us today, and I'm gonna. Yeah, she was there with us in Battery Park City on that fateful day. So I just want to acknowledge Denora, and I also want to say hi to Anna, and I'm gonna try it. Spofakazvaya. Anna is fantastic. She's from Brooklyn. I can't, Anna, you got to spell that name phonetically, but thank you for joining the program. So Annette, you said something that I think was very important. The models for Florida were terrible, but the governor changed the course. and actually change the outcome. And now you're open, right? Is Florida open for business? Maybe describe for our viewers, what's it like in Florida right now?
Well, again, phase one started May 4th, and then it was updated May 11th, May 14th, different changes were made. So the originals were just the restaurants could open at 25% capacity. The beaches could open. That was dropped down, as it should be, to the county level or the city level. So it was the mayors and the county representatives making those choices. The 4 counties with the greatest impact, they stayed closed. Only recently they've gone into phase one, within the last 2 weeks. So we are now fast approaching the point where pretty much the whole state is opening up. Gyms opened up on May 18th. Restaurants are at 50% capacity now. The beaches are open. Almost all of the state parks are open. And behind them, the 4 counties most impacted are also doing the same. We still haven't opened up some things. You're not allowed to do the short-term Airbnb rentals just yet, where people rent their apartments or in the tourist area. We are told that Disney is going to, which closed in mid-March. Disney's going to reopen in mid-July. Certain parts of the parks will open July 11th and the rest July 15th. There's been a real sense of a return to normalcy again. And that makes such a difference. Those who need to stay in, if you read the governor's executive orders and his guidelines, it says if you feel that you need to remain at home, you're over 80, you have a comorbidity, those were the signs that really made the difference. And people listened. I think a lot of it had to do with that people come from other places. They come from New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, in Illinois and Ohio, I think, are the 5 busiest states of migration to Florida. For example, there was a model that said that 100,000 people or some ridiculous number of people in the Villages, which is the big north of Orlando out toward the Panhandle, covers 3 different counties. I think it's called Lake Sumter and Marion, and they were going to have a large number of. Well, the governor went there, message to people early and said, listen, you're at high risk. You're all retired. Just stop it. Get off the golf course. Behave yourselves. Let's flatten this curve. And there's been no significant amount of deaths in any of those 3 counties. The density issue plays a part. We're much more spread, come from other places, and who have survived difficult challenges. So they're not of a mind to ignore a governor in good faith telling you what to do. People listen, and that's made quite a difference.
Common sense. It sounds like common sense to me. I mean, I think Florida. So, have you been to a restaurant or anything yet during the pandemic?
It'll catch up.
It looks like we have a bad connection with Annette.
I'm not hearing, but I'm listening.
Yeah. George asked, have you been to a restaurant since?
I'm going to walk with you and see if I can take you to some place that's easier to hear.
That's great. This is a traveling
We're
show.
going to get out in the Florida sunshine.
There you go. That might work.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, that might work. The traveling show. All right, everybody. So little did you know that you were going to sign in today and actually take a trip to Florida and be outside in the Florida sunshine. So, Annette, George asked if you've been to any restaurants since they reopened.
I have. I've made it my business to go to local mom and pop stores. And they're struggling. But their regulars were very devoted, at least in North Florida. We found that 2 or 3 times a week, the regulars were doing takeout to try and keep their local restaurants afloat. And now that they've reopened, they're trying their best. They're putting in music. They're doing lower costs. They're doing everything they can to draw their people back. I think that old axiom is it takes 21 days to change a behavior.
Yeah.
So the hope is that 21 days will go by and people will start to return. But the small restaurants survive by doing takeout and delivery. The chains, of course, it was easier for them to survive.
So my question is, in recovering Lower Manhattan from the terrorist attack and recovering states and cities from the COVID pandemic, while they're different, the one thing I saw similar was that post 9/11, Governor Pataki and Tim Carey, who was the head of the Battery Park City Authority at the time, they fought really, really hard to get everything reopened because, as you just said, 21 days to create a habit. And their concern was if Battery Park City and the businesses were out too long, that people would have a negative connotation of downtown Manhattan and whether or not it was safe. Can you tell us a little bit about the
Yep.
days? Yeah. Tell us about
Well, I
your.
think you remember, Letitia, that we essentially had a large extension cord. Remembering that Battery Park City had an extension cord for about 6 months. Huge cables coming through the community to provide the electric because we had to open up all of the streets and the roads in order to get the electric properly reinstalled after it had gone down. And one thing that, to my mind, a comparable thing that happened here is the governor said, I have several major construction projects going on throughout this state. And lo and behold, I have no traffic. And I can put the I-4 corridor, every knows you come down to Orlando and you're in that I-4 corridor near the Disney parks. They've been trying to rebuild that for several years. So with no traffic, they took advantage of opportunities that come with challenges and crises. And they put all the construction workers they could find to work. And they're going to complete those projects several months in advance because they had the ability to use the crisis in a way that was positive for the community.
So construction seems to be the key here to recovery, in my opinion, based on years past and now. What you just said is important, that the governor accelerated some projects by putting more workers on the team. In New York, it was just the opposite. Instead of actually accelerating projects that were already on the ground, there was the governor stopped a lot of projects. Only affordable housing projects were allowed to move forward in the construction industry. The road work, they didn't do that. They didn't accelerate road work, even though we desperately need it. However, now Cuomo just recently asked President Trump for federal dollars to do some construction projects. So we're happy to see that that's happening. But again, I guess it's a different point of view. Why would a governor stop projects that were already in the works instead of allowing them to accelerate? I guess it's a different approach.
Well, Florida maybe.
Well, I think that perhaps bad environment. It seems flat-footed, to put it mildly. What was the you can't help but see what's in the Times, the Post, and the Daily News, because when you're from New York, you're always going to read those papers. And I couldn't get over they were calling the Dr. Zucker, is it, the health commissioner, calling him Dr. Death, because they were just flat-footed in their approach to the way that they close things and then to when they reopen them. You know as well as I do, the original epicenter was Westchester County, right within the 3 or 4 mile radius of where I used to live. And it was immediately that was closed down, but not before. And everybody who went to Temple that weekend got infected. The entire community, suddenly Westchester was an epicenter. I think the road and the subways, of course, had a great deal to do with it as well. So there wasn't the use of the opportunities to keep other businesses and other essentials moving that could have kept the city going in the meantime. Upstate really wasn't all that affected. So
Yeah.
one size fits all or the lack of a tailored response did not help. It was great theater on television to watch, press conferences every day. And there's a great deal of radiation of sincerity and empathy, as those of us of Italian American backgrounds often are able to give out. We're good at showing empathy, but it wasn't backed up by what was needed. Upstate never needed to close. And sadly, the area of the state that was already in terrible shape just got worse.
Yeah, well, Staten Island is in that.
So I mean, there will be the nursing home piece of this is something they will be doing postmortems and investigations on for years to come, I'm sure.
Yeah.
The trial lawyers will have a field day.
Yeah, I mean, Staten Island's in that shape. I think, Staten Island met the metric, Letitia, weeks ago. Is that right?
Yeah, that's 2 weeks ago or a week and a half ago, we met all the metrics that he set forward to have us reopen, but he refused to allow us to reopen because he said that, we were part of New York City and that we needed to wait to open until the city reopened.
And then the city proceeded to say, well, everyone go to Long Island and jump on the beach.
Well, once again, I think it's the kind of mindset that is causing people to migrate to Florida. I took account of myself after the last rally last Thursday, where we tried to open a small business who wanted to open because he had to. He had 3 locations, 1 in New Jersey, 2 in New York. And it just so happened it was a tanning salon. But his members had been calling on a regular basis and saying, why can't you open? It's UV light, number 1, and doesn't that kill the virus? Number 2 is I'm going in the bed by myself. I'll have no contact with anyone else. And number 3, you have to clean the bed before and after I leave. So I'll wear my mask. Let me come there and let me feel good about myself, at least by getting my tan. Maybe you and I don't think tanning is essential, but there are people that pay lots of money to be members in that club.
Tanning is essential right now because no one's getting the people up till now. People weren't getting their daylight and their vitamin D, which causes depression, which leads. So there is a medical reason, underlying medical reason to allow that.
Yeah, I'm not going to pretend to be a doctor, but at the end of the day, this man had a small business. He followed all his rules. He had all his health licenses, and we were standing there, hundreds of us, in a parking lot, and we were begging the city, just begging, and I know you identify this, begging the city and the governor and the mayor to allow this man to open. And I thought to myself, what's wrong with this picture? We're begging to give tax dollars to a city and state that is right now, at that moment, we had Cuomo was up with Trump begging him for money because he had a budget deficit. De Blasio was begging for money because he had a budget deficit. Yet here were hundreds of small business owners saying, let us open the same way you let Costco open or Target open or Pathmark open. Well, Pathmark not anymore. They're gone. Walgreens, liquor stores, which again, I don't understand, how that's essential, but all businesses are essential. And we're standing there begging, please, please, please let us give you our tax dollars. And the response we were met
That
with,
people
I'm sorry,
certain levels of power.
yeah.
You know what? Florida's handling the pandemic better, but I think we have the internet down up here.
I
Yeah,
think one of the things
we
that I
do a
learned
little
from
bit better with the internet than
Sharon,
Florida, but that might be just because of her location in her, you know, what the
one of
difference.
the things I don't know if you can hear me.
Can you hear us, Annette?
I don't know if you can hear me, but one of the things that I on the back was that the power of your signature and the power of a court. It humbled me. It forced me. It made me learn how power you had. Sign an order and somebody went to jail. I could decide where a child went home to sleep at night. I could decide if a person was going to be able to go back to their home with the domestic violence cases. I think that you really get the measure of leaders who are elected officials when you have this. Those like you and I, Letitia and Dinora, who worked with Governor Pataki, saw a gracious leader, a caring leader, a man who was working so hard behind the scenes, but he never needed to be the person up front, if you remember. He never needed to be the person making the statement. He allowed other people to take the credit. He allowed other people to have the glory. And in the meantime, what needed to get done was getting done behind the scenes. I think that crises also show the character flaws, if there are any, or the major ones, of political leaders. The grandstanding and I don't want to be unkind because I grew up in Queens, and went to what's called the brother school of the governor. Who went to Archbishop Malloy, and I went to Mary Lewis, the sister school. And one of his sisters was a year ahead of me in high school, and another one of his sisters a few years behind me in high school. So these are close connections and long-term understanding of, and it shows that you rely on your advisor and let other people guide you along the way. The decision on the executive order to send people back into the nursing homes is going to be probably the worst burden he'll carry the rest of his life, because of all the deaths that were occasioned by it. And Letitia, I'm a New Yorker, so by birth, by choice, more mass cards and condolence notes have gone north than I would have sent in a year. One of the panel lawyers I worked with, both of his parents died of assisted living. Other people who were in rehab, morbidities, but putting them right in the path of the virus was the wrong decision. The other thing you learn, and one of the things I like about Dr. Fauci, is that when he said something and it wasn't right, gee, it's changed. We're in a different place today. This is what we need to be thinking about now. I don't believe anyone would have held the governor accountable as much if he had reversed himself or actually thought about what he was doing. He had Javits Center and the U.S. Navy Comfort sitting there. They were retooled in a matter of hours when he asked.
But he's still.
So that's the major error, accounted for as much as 20 to 25% of the deaths in New York. We don't know until the investigate.
All right, so Annette, we're having a hard time hearing you. Apparently, there's some interference in your building. So George, maybe what we'll do is I'll call Annette on the phone, and you can close her down here, and I'll call her on the phone where she'll be in a real time. We won't be able to see her beautiful face,
Yeah,
but
definitely do that. The audio is too hard to understand, and I know the point she's trying to make is very important.
It's fantastic. So I'm going to call her right now, and
Okay.
yeah, okay.
All right, we'll get in that.
We're going to get it right on the phone right now.
I mean, the gov. It's just we're in an interesting time where the governor, And his nursing home failure, in my eyes, it's a failure. And again, this is bipartisan. It's just a clear failure what he did with the nursing homes. The fact that he pushed them back into the nursing homes without
Hello, darling.
the Javits Center or the
Hi.
company, crazy.
All right. Annette, can you hear us?
I can hear you just fine. How about you?
I can hear you. I'm just hoping that our viewers can hear us. One of our viewers that might be near your keyboard, will you be kind enough to let us know that you can hear what Annette is saying?
Yeah, she's coming through okay.
She's coming through okay? All right. So Annette, I think it's important what you were saying before about, having the power to do things and knowing when to use that power. If you could just go over again what you said, because you kept freezing, and I think it's really important that people hear it.
Well, since you know I was a judge, I was appointed by Governor Pataki. I sat for many months, and the thing I learned is that you are humbled. Some of us, myself included, I was humbled by the power that's given to a judge. With my signature, I could send a non-paying parent for child support to jail. Take your toothbrush and go to jail. I had the power to do that. And those are incredible abilities that you should never take lightly, because they affect millions, people's lives. So much as being an executive. You know that I had the ability to, certain people wouldn't shake my hand if I were meeting them for the first time, pre-pandemic, but I could remove them from their household and not allow them to sleep in their own home under a domestic violence order. I could put children into foster care if there were allegations of abuse and neglect, to the point of you can do surrender of children. You can terminate parental rights. Think about that.
Yeah.
Terminate someone's right to be a parent. It takes a long time. So the significance of what I was leading up to is that the authority you're given by the people in the state of New York, or I was, or as the governor and all of the management team have, it is so amazing and all-encompassing that it has to be used wisely and with great measuring and tailoring. And I'm a proponent of never saying one size fits all, because it doesn't. I was remembering in the Pataki administration, if you heard this before, just tell me that our governor, all 6'5" of him, he never had a problem with taking a back seat and allowing someone else to have the limelight in moving the state forward after 9/11. He was not a grandstander. He was not interested in getting the credit. He was interested in getting things done that needed to get done. And he also wasn't Chicken Little. He didn't run around saying the sky was falling. It was, but he didn't say that. We and all of us, like we are now, gone through a painful period where he lost close and dear personal friends. You and I lost close and dear personal friends. The same thing that's happened here. We've lost, so I've said I sent more condolence notes and mass cards to New York and New Jersey than I ever thought I'd have to in a short period of time.
Yeah.
So the other problem is, if you make a mistake, admit it and move on. People will forgive you. What's that old saw? If the horse is dead, dismount.
Yeah.
And it was April 25th, and it's 6 weeks of the order sending people back into their death in these assisted living and nursing homes.
Yeah. So we have joining us as a nurse. Her name is Susan Castano, and she has given us great insight. A couple of weeks ago, we had Catherine Paradiso on, who's also a nurse, and Catherine gave us some insight into what it's like being a nurse at any time, but most specifically during a pandemic. But Susan shares with us that. First of all, she says that Staten Island is a such close proximity to Brooklyn and Manhattan, I believe the concern to not permitting Staten Island to reopen prior to the rest of the city was the fear of increased travel to Staten Island. In other words, we had heard Cuomo say again and again, what good is it closing one state if people are going to travel to the next state and then bring the virus back? And to some extent, I think that it made sense when he was coordinating with all the surrounding states. But the next thing that Susan says, and Annette, this goes to what you said earlier about your ability to handle an emergency or to pivot in an emergency. Javits and Comforts had so many initial rules as to who could be admitted as per federal rules, essentially, and it made those facilities less than useful. And then once the restrictions loosened, allowing COVID patients, there were still guidelines that made it near impossible to transfer patients. Huge disconnect between federal and state on the ground. Now, we just want to address that for a minute because I happen to be a little bit privy as to what was going on with that. And this is, you hear it over and over and over again. Why, the governor had the comfort in Javits. Why didn't he just send all the nurse COVID positive to those places? Well, what was decided early on and this was in connect together, the state and the feds decided that since the hospitals were already infected with COVID, that they were going to keep Javits pristine, right? Because it didn't make sense to contaminate now the Comfort and the Javits Center. So it was going to be that since the hospitals were ready with their protocol for how to handle COVID patients, that the Javits and the Comfort would handle patients other than
That
COVID.
wasn't a federal rule, though.
No, it wasn't a federal rule. It was a decision based on what the concerns were at the time, right? Because the hospitals were already, already quote unquote infected. So why continue to infect yet two more places? But then when it became obvious that and it was all about the vent units, right? We were all talking about respiratory, and all the hospitals were bursting at capacity in their vent units, and they had converted plenty others. But then it was realized that everything wasn't going according to plan. So they pivoted and said, okay, you can send people to COVID positive to Javits and to Comfort. But again, didn't exactly work as everybody predicted, because number one, the models were different. Number two, there were protocols in place that changed the outcome. So, I don't think anybody's blaming anyone for the handling of this virus. And I really get pissed off when I hear people blaming the president for this, Cuomo for that, de Blasio for this, because there was no rule book on this virus. Nobody knew what it was. Nobody knew how it was going to affect us. And the only thing all of the elected officials could do was to take advice from experts and use their brains, right? And to try their best. I think that where the criticisms come in is what happens later on, right? Because we closed everything and we closed down the economy, and the criticisms come in with, how do you don't cut off your head because you have an eye infection. And that's basically what we did. We voluntarily closed our economy to try to stop the spread of the virus. And different governors handled their states differently with very different outcomes, even though the models had grave portended grave outcomes. And that's why we have Annette on the phone now, because she was intimately involved in an emergency situation in New York. And she knows what happened then. And now she's looking at what's going on in the nursing homes and just in general in Florida. And I think that it's not to criticize the Governor Cuomo or Mayor de Blasio or DeSantis or the president. It's to say, hey, two different states, two different people in leadership, same guidelines coming out of Washington, good or bad. they handled them differently. What can we learn from this? And I know that was very long-winded, but Annette, that's why I thought you would be a great guest today. Is because you're analytical and you're legal and you understand about the tax system and the economy as well. So so looking back, Annette, I mean, if you could give New York any advice going forward to stop the hemorrhage of people from New York to Florida, what advice would you give the governor if you had 10 minutes with Cuomo right now?
That's a very good question and a very difficult one to answer. You know that New York has a high regressive sales tax. You know that the store exemption was put into place under the Pataki administration as a stopgap to keep older New Yorkers in their homes so that they would stay in New York because they could live comfortably and not pay as much of the school tax. There was enhanced store that assisted people over 65 with a lower level of income. There were things put into place in the Pataki administration. The entire tax structure for people dying in New York. There was a horrific joke that during the beginning of the Pataki administration under Commissioner Urbach at the time, that it was okay to die in New York again because the tax structure was changed on estates. All of those things, I think, held the baby boomers in New York longer than they would have stayed. But once you got into the 2010s, and the answer became borrowing and one-time quirks, it's nearly impossible to keep the state afloat. With the recession of 2008 and Wall Street not doing well, there were great losses. But when they came back, the money was again used for pet causes instead of where it needed to go to keep the state afloat. You do know, I think, that the New York State pension system is one of the finest in the country because there were always incredibly good controllers throughout the years who made sure that it was fully funded in the good times so that the money was there in the bad times. Every 20 years, there's a call for a constitutional convention that New Yorkers routinely vote down. I was there the last time it happened. I think was it 2017? Every 20 years.
Yeah.
Because the great fear is that the courts would be restructured and also that borrowing would be assessed against the pension system, which is not allowed. It's one of the great successes of New York that the pension system is so solid.
Yeah.
Obviously, New York has a very diverse and difficult population, lots of poor people, lots of immigrants. But it has been proven that it can be changed. It can be worked on. If you remember, in the Pataki years, the person in charge of the welfare system at the cabinet level was from Westchester County, my home county, for 30 years. And they went door to door ringing doorbells. And kids answered the door and said, "Where's mommy? Where's daddy?" "Oh, mommy's at work."
Yeah.
"Oh, really?" And within a few months, half of the welfare rolls disappeared. I mean, they say what you will now, as people do about Mayor Giuliani. He took a city that people thought was out of control and gave it, along with the years of Bloomberg, 20 years of peace and prosperity. Rebuilding is very difficult, but I would never count New York out. It's made it through some rough times over the last 350 years. It's not going anywhere. The real question is, how do you restructure the tax system so that it's fair and so that the state tax actually gets used where it's needed and not to fund pet projects?
Yeah. And it seems like there's a lot of redistribution of wealth again. The same choices and decisions that were made by Koch and by Mayor Dinkins seem to be rearing themselves again in a Cuomo de Blasio duet, if you will. And so what we're seeing is redistribution of wealth, but in a world where technology, for the most part, works regularly, except for, of course, when it's asked the experts, in a world where technology is working so well, people don't need to be chained to New York anymore in order to run their business, right? That elitist, that address of Park Avenue or Madison Avenue or New York City is no longer needed to give your company credibility. And if it is, you can go into a WeWorks or a shared situation or get a post office box and literally find talent from around the world, to work in your business and cut your overhead costs. And so because of that, I think that when we started to see property taxes raised, when we started to see the redistribution of wealth, the governor and the mayor not actually negotiating police, fire, and educate and teacher contracts, but instead, we're going to focus on illegal immigration or giving people lawyers to protect them from ICE, trying to deport them. When they started really funding the social issues, people said, I'm pulling up stakes and I'm going to Florida. And more that those people are not age 65, but age 35.
Yeah.
And go ahead, George. I want you
I was
to
going to say, the governor said they're going down there for the weather. I'm sorry, they're not going down there for the weather. They're going down there because it's easier to do business in Florida. It's cheaper to do business in Florida. They can put more money in their pockets. This is economy and the way it works. The motivation to be a business in New York, if you're not directly serving New Yorkers on a specific issue, is gone.
The most
I'd be gone if it
important
wasn't for
thing
family.
Florida does not have a state income tax. One
Yeah,
of the few states in the country that has a surplus and no state income tax.
Yeah.
New York's real worry. I mean, how wonderful people like the dairy industry, the duck industry. I mean, how do you allow a small interest group to shut down a business that provides the foie gras? It's one of the thriving businesses of the Mid-Hudson region. Yes, of course, people have a right to render their opinions about what kind of food they want to eat. But to regulate the industry, okay, regulate the industry. Don't regulate it out of business and destroy a thriving business of the Mid-Hudson region. If you have a feeling about how the animals are being treated, regulate it, but don't take it out of business. Same kind of thing. New York State had incredible industry, the shoe industry in Endicott, New York, the refrigeration industry in Columbia County, the old industries that were part of the Industrial Revolution through the Erie Canal. But upstate New York, the billions that have been put into the economies, it's just so difficult to bring it back. Buffalo looks great if you have been there. I've been in the last year. The downtown area is being rebuilt. The tourist facilities are great in the summertime. There's so much opportunity in the western part of the state. It's not about weather. Us Italian Americans, we have cousins everywhere. I have cousins who left Long Island to go live through those horrific winters in Buffalo and love it. They love their new city and would not raise their children anywhere else.
Yeah.
New York is really on the brink with the ability to work remotely. If New York loses Wall Street, then it loses the major part of its economy.
Well, what about tourism? I mean, we're facing now the lights out on Broadway until January. So that means we miss the summer, we miss the Christmas holiday. That's a huge economic driver for tourism in New York City is Broadway.
But why? On the basis of what?
Well,
On the basis that And it makes people who are no longer in the echo chamber, and I am no longer in the silo or the echo chamber or whatever you want to call it, because Florida is different. North Florida is very different. Jacksonville's one of the youngest cities in Florida. The average age is somewhere between 35 and 45. And people are coming in droves because it's the back offices for American Express. Chase Manhattan Bank has opened 22 local full-service branches in the last 5 years. My local Chase branch, when I visit, is a young man who grew up on Pelham Parkway in the Bronx. He's the branch manager. So people are coming, not because they're retired, they're coming too. It's not the elephant cemetery any longer. It's also people seeking a place where they can pay half of what they pay for a home on Long Island. They can have lovely climate and quality of life, and museums that have pools and tennis courts and children in safe schools. And this governor, I'm told, part of the reason he won the election just before I got here was that he had shaved and gotten a real vote of confidence from African American women because of his stand on charter schools, that children are entitled to have the best education and parents should have choices. So those are some of the reasons why Florida today is moving forward and is attracting people at all stages of life.
Do you think that's because go back to personality? I mean, do you think that this governor DeSantis, meaning that maybe he's young enough and flexible enough, and maybe not so rigid, that he's willing to move and bend, whereas Cuomo, comes from a long line of politicians who, controlled the state for a long time and his whole career in government. And maybe his perspective is this is the way we've always done it. So we have to do it some more like this. I mean, do you think that might be why DeSantis is doing better?
I think my new governor has his mantra is tailored and measured responses. Even Dr. Burks recognized him in one of the press conferences for the Integrated State and County Department of Health program. We have a dashboard we can look at any given day at any given time to find out what's happening. I think you're right. I think personalities matter. I think that DeSantis, having been a Navy veteran, he's a Yale grad. He's a bright man, much like our governor that you and I worked for. His brilliance and his native intelligence is discounted because he's conservative. But as of this morning, when I checked the dashboard, every life matters. But the Florida dashboard now with 2 or 3 more million people population than New York had 2,460 deaths.
Yeah.
Yesterday, every death matters. 1 person died yesterday in Florida. 1 in 22 million population. So, and those numbers have been continuing. He recognizes the value of tourism. What I think I find most exciting about him is his youth. He's in his 40s. He's a new dad with an adorable child, but he also can, as you say, you use the word pivot. He's not afraid to try different things. When the pandemic hit, the OEM in South Florida exploded, Office of Emergency Management. It was a private company, came in, hired all kinds of young people right out of college, including a friend's son who was just out of Maritime Academy, didn't know where he was going, what he was going to do. He's an ensign in the Navy. Guess what? He's working 12-hour days, 7 days a week in Palm Beach County. Yeah. Working in Office of Emergency Management. So those challenges were met swiftly. They weren't flat-footed.
Yeah.
I think that bureaucracy breeds bureaucracy, and sometimes having someone that's not a completely political person works.
I think you're right about that. I think that, there's so much to be said about, fresh new blood. And to me, it's amazing that Florida, whose, average age is much older than New York, chose to elect a 40-something as their governor. And they continue to elect young people with new ideas. So, you know, I'm not surprised that when I was trying to get local New York City developers to come to Staten Island, because I believed that there was opportunity here for them to create, you know, good housing for seniors and for young people, that they said, you know what, no, we're going to go to St. Petersburg, Florida. And I was like saying at the time, St. Petersburg, what's in St. Petersburg? Why would you choose to do that? But that was obviously the right move, and they were clearly more savvy, and they had a better indicator than I did about Florida being the next bastion, and it certainly has shown itself to be. And I think that if New York is going to stop the hemorrhage and you know, and keep people living here, or at least part-time here, before they retire, then we're going to have to take some pages out of DeSantis's book and try something new. Before I don't want us to leave without recognizing our number one fan. Lucille Chavone is here with us today, and Gina Conroy says hello as well to you, Annette. So, and just to get it right, Anna Shapilkovsky.
Just to get it right, that was good.
I hope I got that right. In the few minutes that we have left, Annette, I just want to turn our attention a little bit to you know, what's going on right now across our country and in big cities across our country with protests, and I'm going to separate them into two different things. Peaceful protests that are to bring attention to the justice needed for the murder of George Floyd, and then the anarchists that are rioting to basically shut down the police and any form of American government. And I wanted to take a moment while you're on the phone, Annette, to bow our heads and take a moment of prayer for George Floyd and his family, and for all of those people that we've lost to violence across America.
You know, I spent the last 10 years of my career working in the poorest congressional district in the United States, in the South Bronx.
Yeah.
And I was so every day impressed by the community that we served, by their desires to protect their children and move forward with life, by the simple decency and hardworking clerks and support personnel and judges and referees and court officers. And our courthouse had 300 employees plus, but I would say the great majority were minority members. And the work that we did, you can't ever discount. The community that we had, the way that we just took care of people without regard to race or color or creed or mental illness, which is a big part of family court in the Bronx. My heart is breaking. And I've been reaching out to so many of my former colleagues to just ask them if they're okay and how can I help. There are no words other than prayer. So I agree with you. Prayer is in order.
So I hope everybody prays for the future of America, and I hope everybody also opens their eyes, you know, and make sure that we understand. There's some live video footage of peaceful protesters actually yelling at anarchists who are destroying neighborhoods, African American neighborhoods, and the anarchists, you know, are leaving leaving people with the perception that it is the Black community that is doing this, and we know that that's not true. And I know before we go, George wanted to have a discussion Oh, no?
Yeah,
Okay.
well, I did some fact checking while we were on this call, and that was actually a fake. It was a fake image.
It was a fake image.
Yeah.
Well, where I was going with that is that, the media plays a role in everything. The media plays a role in, making things larger than they are, or actually helping to quell panic. And, and look, I'm a member of the media, and so I take my responsibility seriously. But, there are times that we have to, call each other out and actually check each other for accountability. And the one thing that I think is so very important is that our media has to stop being so, stop living in an echo chamber, right? Because we have liberal media, we have conservative media, and depending on your viewpoint, you put on the TV and you switch to the station where you're going to hear what you want to hear or your points of view. What good is it for any of us to surround ourselves with people that think and speak only like us? You will never be able to truly get along with your neighbor if you don't listen to their point of view. And I bring this up because my Facebook page has lots of people on it, and I ask questions every day, and I am earnest in those questions. I want to hear what people have to say. And there are people that take umbrage with my questions. It's just a question. Today's question was,
I've never seen anything like it. It's ridiculous.
Today I asked the question, how should the police handle the riots? And people read into that I had a particular point of view about how they should handle the riots. And it's nothing further from the truth. But there are people that have unfriended me because they don't like what other people have to say. There are people that inbox me and tell me that I must be a hater because, some of the people on my page call other people names, and others want me to actually quell the voice of people because they don't like what they're saying. And I just want everybody to know that if you're going to come on my page to answer the question, speak your mind, defend your position. That, if you believe it, then it's true because you believe it and it's your opinion. But don't ask me to tell somebody else how to think, because I'll never do that. That's not who I'm about. Everybody needs to come to their own conclusions. So I'm going to say on that note, for those of you who are ready to tough it out, stay in New York, fight it through, make your voices known, and make your opinions known. For those of you that think you've had enough, obviously Florida is a place that is welcoming a lot of New Yorkers like Annette, and they're very brilliant and smart people. But one thing that's for certain, wherever you see injustice, I think that we all have to stand up and speak on it. The one thing that happened when I saw that videotape of the murder of George Floyd was I asked myself, what would I have done if I was there? And I couldn't get my head around it because I do respect the police authority. And, would I interfere or would I videotape? I came down to that I would have interfered and I probably would have been shot. George, what about you?
I would have been on top of that cop like white on rice.
Annette?
I would have interfered.
Yeah.
I'm not a bystander. I never have.
I think that the people, the cops that stood by and watched are culpable. And frankly, I think that the people that stood by and videotaped also should ask themselves, how could they do that? And I think we all need to ask ourselves, what would we have done? I'm not saying there's a right or wrong. Well, that's wrong. I am saying there's a right or wrong.
There is a right or wrong.
I'm no law enforcement person, and I know several.
Yeah.
Who have any understanding of why that happened. And every last one of them said the other three officers should have intervened, and however they needed to intervene, they needed to do something.
Yeah.
If I could add, this is something to me, when you watch the videos of this happening, somehow this has turned into a divide in the country when everybody I know, left, right, center, is all in agreement. Everybody agrees that cop handled this situation incorrectly and should be put in jail. But somehow the media has managed to make another wedge out of a topic where we're all on the same page. It astounds me, and it scares me.
You'll need to take out your old book by Saul Lindsay Rules for radicals and read the chapter on tactics.
Yeah.
That is what's happening.
Yeah,
His textbook is being put into play after 100% of people are in agreement that something's wrong. It shouldn't be dividing us as it is.
It amazes me, and frankly, I think that there's 5 steps to take down a republic, right? You find the young people who are easily influenced and who have a natural penchant for rebellion, and you tell them that there's an injustice being served upon them, and you convince them of it, and then you give them a platform to share their opinions. And I think we did that with social media. Then you keep on hammering it. You hammer it down, because soon the corporate America is going to echo their sentiments, because that they have the buying power, right? They're the future buying power. So corporate America is going to adopt that there's an injustice, and so is the news media. Then you wait for an actual injustice to occur, as we've seen what happened, and then the anarchists move in and start to destroy the economy, and and say that the government is no good, and then ultimately you overthrow your government and you install somebody who tells those young people that they are going to give them everything they want. Listen, it's a chessboard. America interfered in Cuba. America interfered in Iran. America interferes in governments by trying to spread democracy. There are other governments that have a vested interest in making sure that America does not continue to be a superpower. I think that what we have to do is unite as a nation for this government, because as bad as we may be, there is no government on earth that will allow anyone to, and I mean anyone, succeed. Only America will allow and embrace the idea that everyone can have the dream. And I want to leave us on that note. So, George, do you have anything to add?
No, no, I have nothing to add except, everybody keep their heads. We're all on the same page. We're all mad at that cop. We're all mad that we're locked in, but we want to get out sensibly. Don't let the media divide us.
Annette?
Well said. Amen.
Amen. All right, we're way over 7 minutes. Thank you all for tuning in. And on Friday, we're going to have a little surprise for you. So look for the promo, and George and I will let you know what we're going to do. All right, everybody. Have a great afternoon. Be safe.
Got on my leather jacket Thriller. They're showing at the Miller. Man, I'm a lady killer. If I want her, I'ma steal her. I promise I can make her fly away like caterpillars. So if you don't know by now, then you should probably get familiar.
Okay. All right. So from now on, I'm going to